So again, welcome guys to our wonderful webinar, Supporting Students Through the Financial Aid Process, Tools, Tips, and Teamwork. And today we are joined by two fantastic guest speakers who are really going to dive into these applications and talk about what the process is, how to work together to get this done, and any tips that you need to know. So we have a jam-packed session today with a lot of valuable information on both the FAFSA and the TASFA. So, quick look at our agenda. This is what is going to drive our conversation today. First, we have our welcome and introductions. Then we're going to dive into the FAFSA. Then we're going to switch over and talk about the TASFA application. Then we're going to cover our bright ideas, which are actually your amazing ideas. These are the responses to the registration questions that we ask you when you register for the webinar. So a lot of great bright ideas that you guys had that we get to share with you towards the end of the presentation. Then, of course, we want to talk about the Texas OnCourse Academy Spotlight and how the Texas OnCourse Academy supports you and your financial aid efforts. And then at the very end, so you have to kind of stay for the whole thing to hear about the My Texas Future Recognition Program. This is a fantastic program that we've launched this year to help bring awareness to this wonderful, awesome website. And you actually can get free swag and free things. So stay tuned for information about how to sign up for that. And then, of course, we have our Q&A. Your hosts for today's event is the Professional Learning and Engagement team. My name is Lauren Disher. I'm the Senior Network Coordinator for the team. I've been with the team for about 3 years, and I have the pleasure of working with Andrea Panter, our Director of Professional Learning and Engagement, Josh Garcia, our Implementation Coordinator, Jared Garza, our Network Marketing Coordinator, and Ariana Wells, our Professional Learning and Engagement Team Intern. So all of us come together to bring you these webinars every month, to bring you this content. So we're really excited to have you here today. And without further ado, I will pass it over to our awesome guest speaker, Jasmine.
Oh, hi everyone. My name is Jasmine Tejeda, and I am a manager on our training and technical assistance team at USFire. I'll pass the mic over to Giselle, who's going to introduce herself, then I'll share my screen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Giselle Martinez, and I'm a technical writer with Student Financial Aid Programs at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Before we jump into TASFA, we are going to just really quickly talk about our mission here at Texas OnCourse. We like to start all of our sessions off just talking about the mission here, which is providing advising professionals with the resources and community they need to deliver exceptional college and career advising to every student. So all of the resources and all of the content and materials that we create and produce start and end with this mission in mind. We really do keep this at the forefront of everything that we do here at Texas OnCourse. All right, so we're going to dive into the FAFSA. So before we dive into kind of the application and all of that information, we really want to know, how would you rate your knowledge level of the FAFSA? We just launched a poll, so you can put your information there. Are you a beginner? Maybe you've kind of done a couple applications, but you really want to learn more and expand your knowledge about it. Maybe you're intermediate. You've done the, FAFSA for a year now and you're really kind of ready to go, but you know that you could still like get a good refresher, learn more. Maybe you are an expert and you could write the book on the FAFSA. So go ahead
Yeah,
and put some
seen a
choices
lot
in.
of intermediate. Looks like 63% of people are intermediate. We have 26% that are beginners, and then we have 14% that are experts. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Good job, guys. That's wonderful. Well, then it's great that you're here and can get a good, great refresher, maybe learn some new things, probably. So excited to have you. And with that, I will turn it over to Jasmine.
All right. Thank you so much. All right, give me a second, y'all, while I go ahead and share my screen. Give that a moment to load. Hopefully y'all can see the correct things. There we go. All right, I'm getting the thumbs up, and I'm just gonna also make sure I can pull up the Q&A so I can keep an eye on that as well. All right, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get us started with some introductions, some more introductions, I know. But for anyone on the line who may not know who You Aspire is, we are a national nonprofit that is working to improve the economic mobility of underrepresented students by creating financial solutions to diverse post-secondary pathways. And we do so through our 4 student-centered impact models, which you can see here on the screen. We advise students directly, train practitioners like you all across the country, and create systems change through our consulting and our policy work. Now, I know that y'all already know my name is Jasmine Tejeda and that I'm a manager on our training and technical assistance team. But to share a little bit more about myself, before I joined the training team, I was a You Aspire advisor. So I have a lot of experience supporting students through completing financial aid forms like the FAFSA. And back when I was in high school, I was also served by You Aspire. I am originally from Boston, Massachusetts, but I'm currently based out of Central Texas. And whenever I am not training or not on this computer screen, you can most likely find me watching a movie, curled up on my couch, or at the movie theaters. All right, so let's dive into our first half of today's content, which will focus on the 26-27 FAFSA. As I mentioned previously, I'm going to keep an eye out on the Q&A, so as questions come in, I'll try to pause and answer those questions if I can. But if you all have any questions, I'll feel free to drop them in. I will make sure to pause and we can kind of go through them in live time as well. Okay, so as I'm sure many of you all know, the 26-27 FAFSA is now available. I think this is probably the first year ever, if I'm not mistaken, that the application launched before October 1st. So it went live, I think, a couple days leading up to that usual October 1 date. Now, as we hoped for, the application we're happy to announce is pretty much consistent with last year's application. So that is a huge relief for those of us who've been trying to play catch up with all of these changes that have been implemented over the past 2 years. What FSA has been working on since last year's application is making sure that there's an overall smoother user experience. So some of the improvements that we have seen or will continue to see in the 26-27 FAFSA include a real-time identity verification for users with a social security number who are creating their FSA ID accounts. And we've seen an overall simpler way for students to invite contributors to complete their section of the FAFSA form. And so we'll dive into these a little bit deeper as we navigate the FAFSA portion of today's webinar. So to back it up just a little bit, let's talk about what a contributor and how contributors can create FSA IDs, what those are. So as a reminder for some folks, or for those of you who may be newer to this process, a contributor is anyone who is required to provide information on the FAFSA form. So first and foremost, that is always going to include the student. They are considered a contributor on their own FAFSA application. But contributors also include parents of dependent students, but depending on how those parents may have filed their taxes, one or both of those parents may be considered contributors who need to log in and complete their portion of the application. And last, we have student spouses. They may need to contribute their information, log in as a contributor to provide their information if they filed separately from their spouse. Now, regardless what category you find yourselves under, every contributor is going to need an FSA ID account to access the FAFSA form. And so users can go to studentaid.gov to create their FSA ID accounts. Now, in the past, it was a requirement for users to have a social security number in order to create an FSA ID account, but that is no longer the case. In fact, when you're setting up your FSA ID account, you'll notice that there is a box that will allow users to indicate that they don't have a social security number. Now, with that said, I want to highlight the groups of people who should be checking this box off. So it is very clear in the guidelines that are listed when you are creating your FSA ID account that this option or this box should only be checked off if you are a student and a citizen of a freely associated state, needs to complete the FAFSA form online, or if you are a parent or spouse of a student who is applying for financial aid. Now, although having a social security number is no longer required to create an FSA ID account, it is a requirement to use a unique email address when you're setting up that account. And so, in other words, the email address that you use to create that account cannot be used to create another account. So a student and their parent cannot use the same email address when they're creating their FSA ID accounts. Now, when you are in this process, users are typically asked to set up at least one form of multi-factor authentication, or MFA. And this can be set up through a phone number, an email address, or through a third-party app. And this is really meant to act as an extra layer of security when it comes to accessing this information. Now, most users will set up their FSA ID account and verify their email address because that is required, and they won't set up the other forms of multi-factor authentication. But we actually recommend that users set up all forms of multi-factor, or MFA, so that way users can enter or access their FSA ID information through a phone number, an email address, or through a third-party app. And again, it really is just meant to act as an extra layer of security to make sure that whenever someone's trying to access the FAFSA or the FSA ID account, whoever's accessing that information is the owner of that information. Now, going back to one of the improvements that I previously mentioned that we're going to see or have been seeing come to this application process is the real-time identity verification. And so starting this past August, so August 2025, users who are setting up their FSA ID account and had a social security number, they're able to set up their account and have their identity verified instantly. And with this instant verification, this enables the immediate transfer of the IRS tax information that goes into the FAFSA form, which could also speed up the overall time that you're spending completing and submitting the application. Now, this is a huge win because in the past, users had to wait 1 to 3 days for the Social Security Administration to verify their identity. So that is no longer true on that initial attempt when you're creating your FSA ID account. Again, if you have that Social Security number and that information is entered in accurately, then their information or identity is verified instantly. Now, if a user goes back into their account and changes any of their personal identifiers, like their name or maybe their date of birth, for example, then that verification of taking 1 to 3 days, that kind of comes back around the corner. So if you're going back and you're making those changes, it will take those 1 to 3 days for the Social Security Administration to confirm the identity of this person. Now, we know that users don't need a Social Security number in order to create an FSA ID account, but their identity still needs to be verified. So for users without Social Security numbers, when they're creating their FSA ID account, they might see a series of knowledge-based identity questions that are generated by TransUnion. If they see those questions appear and they're able to answer them successfully, then that contributor's FSA ID account is going to be verified immediately. However, if the user is not able to answer those questions successfully, or for some, they may not see those questions generate at all because they don't have information housed with TransUnion, then there are no additional steps that they need to take currently. So in other words, their FSA ID account is set up and it's verified, and you can use that FSA ID account to complete your portion of the FAFSA and submit it. Last December, FSA had announced that the original manual verification process was put on pause. So before they announced that they were allowing users to move forward without needing to verify their identity further, FSA required parents to upload documents and send them to FSA to confirm their identity. But they quickly realized that that process wasn't foolproof. There wasn't a full list of documents that parents may have access to, so they expanded that list, but that wasn't enough. It still wasn't a secure way for parents to send their information to federal student aid because they had folks sending it through an email. So they announced this pause on December 6th, to be exact, that they were going to put a pause in this and figure out a better way to confirm these parents' identity. As of today, they haven't figured out what that solution is, and so that pause will remain true for the 26-27 FAFSA. So hopefully they can figure out a more, again, secure way to verify these users' identity. But until then, right now, that process is paused. All right. Now, I also mentioned earlier that there is a simpler contributor invite process. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say most of us on this line are supporting students who are going to require parent information on the form. However, I do want to highlight that you could be working with a student. It's very possible that you could be working with a student who is married and may need to invite their spouse to be a contributor. But either way, if you're working with a student who needs to invite a contributor to provide their information on the FAFSA form, you'll notice on their FAFSA navigation bar that there is a section that kind of squeezes in there between colleges and the signature, and that section is labeled Contributor Invite. And this section will prompt students to only provide the email address of the person that they need to invite to contribute their information on the FAFSA form. So for students in the past, it was kind of tricky. They had to invite their parents by entering their personal identifiers, so their full name, date of birth, social security number if they had one, or their home address. And that left a lot of room for error, right? Typos happen. Sometimes students may guess what their parent's birthday is, and that could cause a lot of mismatch. But now students are just being asked to provide the email address of the parent. That parent will receive an email like you see here on the screen, inviting them to contribute to their student's FAFSA. And at the very bottom, you'll see that there is a unique invitation code. Now, a couple of things about this invitation code. It's not case sensitive. So if you were to enter this code in and type in 7 lowercase b instead of uppercase b, it would still work. Another thing to know about this invite code is that you will never see similar characters being used. And so what I mean by that is FSA is not trying, but they will not use characters such as O and 0 because those kind of can look like one another. In that same regard, you're not going to see the letter I or the number 1 used because those can kind of be mistaken for each other as well. When the parent is ready to start their section of the FAFSA form, in this email invitation, there's going to be a button labeled Accept Invite. And this is the first way that parents can provide their information. Clicking that button will prompt them to log in with their FSA ID account, which, as a reminder, parents will need a verified account in order to complete the FAFSA. Once they are logged in, they're going to see that invitation code pre-filled. And once they hit submit, they can go ahead and access their portion of the FAFSA form. Now, you could be working with students who enter in that email address, make sure that it is correct, and that parent never receives it. It happens, right? Emails can end up in the spam folder. If that happens on the home page of the FAFSA form, the other route or the other method for accessing the FAFSA form is clicking the option to accept that invitation. By accepting that invitation, you can go ahead and enter in that invite code that the student will have received when they submitted their portion of the FAFSA form. You can enter in that invite code and the parent can start their portion then. So one of those 2 options is what you have available for accessing and starting that section of the FAFSA. All right, I'm going to pause here and see if folks have any questions. I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A, but I'll pause here just in case. Okay. I know we have some time at the end for folks to continue asking questions, so I'm going to keep us moving along just so we can stay on track. All right, so when you're in the FAFSA application as a student, the very first section of the form that they're going to have to tackle is going to be a section that asks a series of questions. And those series of questions are there to determine whether or not the student is required to provide parent information. And so if a student answers yes to any of those questions that appear in the personal circumstances section of the form, they are automatically independent and can submit their FAFSA without any parent information. But if they say no to all those questions, then they're going to have to provide that parent info. But let's review what those questions or what those scenarios are. So again, if a student can say yes to any one of these scenarios, they are independent for the purposes of the FAFSA, and they are not required to provide any parent information. Those scenarios include if the student will be 24 by January 1 of the award year that they are applying for, if they are married but not separated, they're independent. If they are working on an advanced degree like a master's, or if they're working towards a PhD, they are independent regardless of their age. If they are currently serving in the US Armed Forces or are a veteran, they are independent. If at any time after the age of 13, they were an orphan, a ward of the court, or in foster care, they don't have to provide parent information because they're independent. If they've gone to court to be considered legally independent from their parents and are an emancipated minor, they're independent. If they have a court-ordered legal guardian, they do not have to provide parent information. They also do not have to provide information about that court-ordered legal guardian. If you have a student who has children or dependents who are living with them and receiving the majority of financial support from the student, that student is independent. And last, we have students who are unaccompanied youth who are homeless do not have to provide parent information on the FAFSA because they're independent. Now, a couple things to note: when a student answers yes to this scenario, it will allow them to submit the application without inviting a parent to provide their information. However, colleges will most likely follow up to confirm their independent status. So they may ask for documents to provide as supporting proof that a student, for example, is married, right? Or that a student has a court-ordered legal guardian. So I always like to prepare students who are filing their FAFSA as independent. I always like to prepare them for the follow-up because sometimes that can be a little time consuming and it can sometimes come out of nowhere if a student isn't expecting that follow-up. Now, you may be working with students who say no to every single one of these scenarios, but they have an unusual circumstance that is preventing them from providing their parent information. Now, there are some examples listed here of what an unusual circumstance is. For example, if a student is a victim of human trafficking, or if a student has left home due to an abusive or threatening environment. This isn't the entire list of acceptable unusual circumstances. These are just some examples. But this question appears asking the student, is this your scenario? Do you find yourselves in this situation where something is preventing you from providing that parent information? Because if the student answers yes to this question, it will still allow them to submit their FAFSA without parent information. However, they'll submit FAFSA with a provisional independent student status, which means that they will have to follow up with the financial aid office to confirm what their unusual circumstance is and see if the colleges can uphold that unusual circumstance and not require that parent information. Now, in other scenarios, you could be working with students who can't say yes to any of those independent scenarios, and they don't have an unusual circumstance. Maybe their parent just doesn't want to provide their information on the FAFSA for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they assume that that means they have to pay for their student's college career. There's a question asking just that. Are your parents refusing to provide their information? If a student answers yes to this question, first-year students can submit their FAFSA without any parent information and still qualify for a total of $5,500 in the direct unsubsidized loans. Now, that $5,500 is not a lot when we're thinking about tuition and how expensive tuition can be, right? Not including fees and if students are planning to live on campus, and it is a loan. However, it is an option for students who may find themselves in that scenario. Now, for our students who are dependent, they are required to provide parent information on the FAFSA. And so it's important for us to ground ourselves in who FAFSA considers to be a parent. Now, luckily, when students are submitting the FAFSA form, there are a series of questions that can help students determine who the parent is, but we're going to walk through this together. When FAFSA is requiring parent information, they are very clear that they only ever want information from someone who is a legal parent. And who FAFSA considers to be a legal parent is a biological parent, an adoptive parent, or a step parent. Now, given that, we get questions all the time, like should a grandparent, a foster parent, an older sibling, an aunt, uncle, a legal guardian, should they ever be reported as a parent on the FAFSA? And the answer to that question is no. If the person you're considering to put down as a student's parent, if you're unsure whether or not they're meeting the definition, think to yourself, is this person in front of me, are they a biological parent? Are they an adoptive parent, or a step parent? And if the answer to all those questions are no, FAFSA does not want their information reported on the form. All right. Now, it can get kind of tricky trying to navigate the different relationships, right? Because FAFSA doesn't always require both parent information to be reported. And so to help guide you through figuring out who needs to provide their information, we have a guide that can walk you through the conversations that you can have with students. This is just one way to approach it, but you can definitely have these conversations however you see fit with your students. But you could start off by asking them, are your parents married to each other? If the answer to that question is yes, then you want to go ahead and report both parent information on the FAFSA form. But let's say the answer to that question is no, my parents are not married to each other. Well, then you want to ask the student, do your parents live together? Because if the answer to that question is yes, then that still means that they are required to provide both parent information on the form. Now, let's say the student says, my parents are not married to each other and no, they don't live together, excuse me. Well, then you want to ask the student, which parent provided the majority of financial support in the last 12 months? Because in that scenario, the student is now only required to provide one parent information on their FAFSA, and we have to figure out which parent we're going to put. And the parent we're going to put is the one who provided the majority of financial support for the student. In the event that that financial support is split 50-50, I'll be honest, that's a very rare occasion, right? You can't split a penny. But in the event, if you have parents in front of you that are like, we split everything 50-50, you then have to report the parent with the greater income and assets. Once you figure out who that parent is, you then want to ask, is that parent remarried? Because if the answer to that question is yes, then the student has to report parent information for their parent and their step parent. But if the answer to that question is no, then you only want to report information for that one parent. Now, I do see a question in the chat asking, will students be considered for grants if a student only qualifies for the unsub loan because parent refused to provide information? So that is referring back to the question that is asking the student, is their parent refusing to provide info? Would you like to submit your FAFSA without parent information? So they wouldn't qualify for any other federal financial aid than the federal unsubsidized loan. So they wouldn't qualify for example, the federal Pell Grant. And it is likely that they probably wouldn't qualify for any institutional grants and state grants, but that just depends on where the student is applying for college and where they are a resident in. What do you tell a parent who is afraid to complete the FAFSA because they do not have a social security number? That's a great question. I'm going to ask to hold on to that question because we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in our presentation. Okay, so let's get back into entering parent information. Now that we kind of know how to navigate the conversation when trying to figure out which parent to report on the FAFSA, it is important to also note that the parent that you're working with, their marital status also impacts who needs to log in as a contributor. So for example, let's say you're working with parents, right, who are single, separated, divorced, or widowed. Once they enter in that marital status, it lets FAFSA know that we only need parent information from one person, and that one person can create an FSA ID account and log in and complete their section of the form. However, if you're working with parents who are unmarried and living together, parents who are married but not separated or remarried, well, now FAFSA needs information from two parents. And both of those parents may need FSA ID accounts depending on how they file their taxes. So for our parents who are, again, unmarried and living together, married or remarried, we want to ask those parents, did you file your 2024 taxes jointly with your current spouse? If the answer to that question is yes, then only one parent will need to log in with their FSA ID account. Hopefully they already have one, but they can create their FSA ID account if they don't. And that one parent can complete the entire parent section. Now, that one parent will be asked to provide the birthday of their spouse, but that's it. They can complete the entire section on their own. If the answer to this question is no, right? Did you file your taxes jointly in 2024 with your current spouse? If the answer to this question is no, then both parents will need to create an FSA ID account and complete their own parent section. So when parent one is in the form, if that second contributor is required, they're responsible for inviting parent two. And all they will need to do to invite parent two is provide their email address. Now, I wanted to take a minute and talk about supporting mixed status families in submitting the FAFSA form, which someone did drop a question in the chat, which we'll come back to again in a minute. But before we dive into some to how to support mixed status families, I do want to highlight the sort of elephant in the room around privacy of the FAFSA, the information that is reported on FAFSA. So as of today, federal law currently prohibits the use of any of the information that is reported on the FAFSA form for any purpose other than determining and awarding federal financial aid. However, under this administration, usage of FAFSA data could change, right? And that we don't know when or if that will happen, right? We can't really make that call. We can just share what we know to be true as of today. And so with that said, we think it is important that we are staying up to date on FAFSA data and policy changes, which I will share how to do that when we close out. But it is also important to know that the decision to complete FAFSA should be made by the student and their family. So to that question around parents who are afraid to complete the FAFSA form, that is a very valid fear, right, in today's political climate. And so I think what we can do is validate those feelings, share what we know to be true, and allow families and students to make decisions that are best for them. Now, if you're wondering why this question was dropped in the chat or why we're talking about the current privacy laws in regard to the data that is entered in on FAFSA, is because the FAFSA application is a form that unlocks federal financial aid. And federal financial aid is only eligible for students who meet certain immigration or citizenship statuses. So on the FAFSA form, in the student demographic section, there's going to be a question asking the student to identify what their current citizenship status is. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how students should answer this question based off of the options that they have available to them. So if a student selects that they are a US citizen or a US national, that could mean that they have a US passport or a US birth certificate. It could mean that they have a certificate of naturalization. But either way, this means that the student is eligible for federal financial aid and can continue completing the FAFSA form. Now, the second option that a student can choose from is that they are an eligible non-citizen. And students that are selecting this option could be students that are US permanent residents and hold a green card. Could be users that have arrival documents such as an I-94 showing that they are a refugee, an asylee, a Cuban Haitian entrant, or have parolee status. This also includes students who are victims of human trafficking and hold a T visa. Students who are in the US as a battered immigrant or child under the Violence Against Women's Act. And this option should also be selected by students who are completing the FAFSA form, who are citizens of a freely associated state. If a student falls under any one of these categories, they are also eligible to complete the FAFSA form. Now, the last option that students have to choose from when answering that question about their current citizenship status is that they are neither a citizen nor eligible non-citizen. And this option should be selected by students who could be holders of non-immigrant visas. So if they have a student, a work, or a tourist visa. It could be selected by students who have TPS or temporary protected status. It could also be selected by students who have who have DACA status or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Act. Or it could be selected by students who are in the moment completely undocumented. If a student selects this option, it is important to note that they are not eligible for federal financial aid, and what their next steps are heavily depend on where they live in the United States. In Texas, there is an alternative financial aid form for students to complete, which we will talk about later today, known as the TASFA, that could potentially unlock state financial aid and state financial aid, institutional aid, and in-state rates. But it is always important whenever you're working with a student who is not eligible to complete FAFSA to do research about not just the state aid policies for where they live in, but also research state aid policies for colleges that they may be interested in applying to if they are out of state. Every single state operates differently. Every single college has their own policies. And so it's important that students are aware of what the current policies are. So whether that means researching the state aid policies or reaching out to the colleges directly. In addition to that, we always recommend students who are not eligible for federal financial aid to apply for scholarships and to apply for them as early as possible. When you don't have access to federal financial aid, we want to make sure that we can beef up other areas of financial aid, like outside scholarships or looking at schools that may award a lot of institutional aid, right? So I always implore students to do their research about policies while also applying for scholarships. All right, we're going to jump back into the FAFSA. So if you have questions about TASFA, I'm going to ask you to hold on to those until we get to that portion of today's session. But jumping back into the FAFSA application, when you have users who are logging into the FAFSA form, they are going to be asked to provide consent for having their federal tax information transferred over from the IRS into the FAFSA form. And so the reason why I wanted to start this section about reporting financial information off with providing consent is because consent is required in order for a student to remain eligible for federal student aid. So we want to make sure that we are encouraging all contributors who are looking to submit the FAFSA form. We want to make sure that we're encouraging them to provide consent. Now, when it comes to reporting income information, you're most likely going to find yourselves in one of these three scenarios. You could be working with parents who file taxes and are able to use the DDX. You could be working with parents who file taxes and are not able to use the direct data exchange. Or you could be working with parents who didn't file a US tax return. So I'm going to walk us through a little bit of how we can support folks who were able to, how we can support folks in reporting income, starting off with parents who are able to use the direct data exchange and file taxes. So I go back and forth between saying DDX and the direct data exchange, but know that those are the same thing. But the direct data exchange is the process for transferring tax information from the IRS into the FAFSA form. So once that user has consented to using the DDX, having the DDX pull in that tax information, what it does is reduces the number of financial questions that folks will see on the FAFSA form, because those questions are all being answered in the back end as the DDX is pulling in that tax information. Now, whenever we talk about providing consent and having tax information transferred over, we sometimes see folks have questions about folks who file taxes, but for some reason weren't able to use the DDX. And when FAFSA Simplified initially launched, it was kind of unclear what was a glitch and what wasn't. So sometimes you had folks who just weren't able to have their taxes pulled, and we just had to manually report tax information. So that's the first thing that I want to highlight. When you have parents who did file taxes and are not able to use the DDX, that will mean you have to manually report their tax information. But I wanted to talk about some of the common reasons why someone might be routed down that manual entry pathway. It's not a glitch. These are just situations that could be true that are preventing that parent from having their taxes pulled. So the first is a big one, that they didn't grant consent. If you don't grant consent for the DDX to actually work, they're not going to be able to pull in that tax information. Another reason could be that there's a recent marital status change. If the parent filed a foreign tax return, the DDX is only able to pull in tax information from the IRS, and the IRS does not house foreign tax information. If the user's identifiers do not match the IRS records, like their name, date of birth, and their social security number, if they have one, if the information on the taxes doesn't match what the user entered in when creating their FSA ID account and completing the FAFSA, right, that is going to cause a mismatch. And the last one, I don't think I know I haven't seen, I was going to say, I don't think our team has seen, but if there's an IRS outage, if for some reason those servers are down, that could be a reason why someone would be prompted to manually enter in tax information. But I wanted to highlight those again just to make sure folks know that this could happen. You could be working with parents where that DDX is just not able to pull in that tax information. And doesn't mean that something is wrong, right? Maybe unless you didn't grant consent, that is a different scenario. But it could also just mean that maybe there was a change in the marital status, right? But either way, what you want to do is make sure that you have the parents bring in their actual tax forms so you can manually report their income information. Now, the last scenario is working with parents who didn't file a US tax return, which is a question we get all the time. Do I have to submit FAFSA if I didn't file taxes? How do I submit FAFSA if I didn't file taxes? It is totally okay if you're working with parents who didn't file taxes at all, or if you're working with parents who didn't file a US tax return, to be specific. FAFSA still is going to ask for their income information. You're just going to report it maybe a little bit differently than you would other parents. So when a parent indicates that they didn't file a US tax return, they have to select a reason as to why they didn't file. And that reason that they select will indicate what their next steps are. If you're working with a parent who worked and earned income in a foreign country, and that could include parents who filed a tax return with Puerto Rico or another US territory. It could include parents who file taxes just in a foreign country. This includes parents who earned income in a foreign country, but maybe weren't required to file taxes. Either way, if you have a parent who earned income in a foreign country, whether they file taxes there or not, FAFSA is still going to ask for their information. The key is that when you're reporting that income information, you have to report it in US dollars before you enter it in on the FAFSA application. Now, if you're working with a parent who selects that they earned income in the US, but they didn't earn enough to require them to file taxes, or if you're working with parents that didn't file taxes for reasons other than low income, like for example, maybe they were a victim of identity theft, or if you're working with a parent who didn't file taxes because they didn't work in 2024, then their financial section is complete. Now, I know we have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I'm going to get to those in a minute or so, but I'm going to just start to close us out. So when it comes time to sign and submit the FAFSA, whether you're logged in with the student or you're logged in with the parent, they're always going to be provided an opportunity to review the answers that they have previously entered. And I strongly recommend that students and parents, or all contributors, just pause and go through and make sure that the answers they have provided are accurate. Now, once you go through and if everything looks okay, you then have the opportunity to sign your section of the form. But you'll notice as you scroll on down, if you are logged in as a student and they started the FAFSA form and they need to provide parent information, you're going to notice that they only have the option to sign their section. And they don't quite yet see that submit button. And that's because they will need their parent information. And so when they sign their portion, they're going to see a semi-confirmation page, letting them know you've done your job, right? You've completed your section of the application, but we still need that parent information. It's going to remind students that, hey, you invited this parent via this email address, and this is the invite code that we sent to them. I recommend just maybe taking a screenshot, having that invite code somewhere safe just in case you need it. But remember, it'll also be in the email that gets sent to the parent. Now, if the student needs to update the email address, maybe they notice there was a typo, they can manage and edit that email address here as well. Now, once the last contributor is in the FAFSA form and they've provided their information, they will be the ones to submit the FAFSA. And so if that last person in the form is the parent, they're going to see a confirmation page that has limited information, while the student will receive a full confirmation email with their estimated student aid index and their estimated eligibility for federal aid. If the student is the last one in the form and they submit the application, they will see the full confirmation page with their estimated SAI and that federal aid eligibility. All right. I know we have a couple of questions here in the chat, or in the Q&A, I should say. So I'm just gonna go through some of them. Or would y'all prefer me to type out answers so that we can share it in a follow-up?
I think you can go ahead and go through them. That works. Thanks, Jasmine.
Yeah, of course, no problem. Okay, so I saw this might be later on in the presentation, but with the current government shutdown, how will FAFSA processing federal financial aid be affected, and what should we be communicating to students and potential delays or impacts? As of right now, there are no, with the government shutdown, there are no impacts to the FAFSA submission process, the processing time. There is still support, and when you call into the Federal Student Aid Information Center. In terms of how we can communicate to students and families, we actually have some talking points that I would love to share with you all. I can just copy and paste that in our Q&A. So if you want to use those talking points to communicate or address any concerns with students and families, you're welcome to steal them from us. Okay, another question. Hi, by any chance, did you cover who qualifies for FAFSA? I'm asking for students who were granted asylum. Hopefully, in us going through the immigration statuses, hopefully that answered your question, but let me know if it didn't, and I'm happy to follow up. Like if you have a specific status in mind, I'm happy to follow up. With the new definitions for in-state tuition/residence, qualifications for public universities, are there merit scholarships and even some of the newer income-based scholarship programs tied to the new definition of in-state residence? I'm gonna assume that is a question more so for our TASFA portion, so we might just leave, unless Giselle, I saw you come off mute. I don't know if you wanted to answer that
Yeah,
now.
yeah, I can answer that one. So when it comes to scholarships offered at institutions, we do not determine eligibility requirements for those. They may decide to have in-state residency as a requirement, but that's not something we determine. So it's best to consult with each individual institution on that.
All right. Feel free to continue to submit questions. I will still be here answering them. But before I stop sharing my screen, I did want to share with you all that we will be sharing out the PowerPoint slides, which include some resources. A lot of our resources live free and open to anyone who may find them helpful on our website at uaspire.org. We have a lot of our application checklist, our how-to videos. We also host virtual events for counselors and students and families, so feel free to check that out. We also have a ton of guides on our YouTube channel. We will include, I can make sure to share that link, but I think if you just go to YouTube and search You Aspire, you should be able to find us. But if you have any students who are more of visual learners, you might find our videos a little bit more helpful. And I mentioned earlier, providing some resources for y'all to stay up to date in regard to federal policy changes. We do have a policy agenda and resource tab on our website, You Aspire, but we also wanted to highlight NCAN's Federal Policy Action Center. These are great places to stay up to date on some of those federal policies, but I also wanted to highlight the President's Alliance. That is usually where I go to stay up to date on state policies. So if you are working with a student and maybe looking for some, looking into some schools out of the state of Texas, you can definitely head to their website and just try to stay up to date with some of those other state policies. All right, well, I think that is it for me. Like I said, I'm happy to continue to answer any questions that y'all drop in the Q&A feature.
Thank you, Jasmine. That was phenomenal. Such a good information session on FAFSA. We really appreciate it. And with that, I'll go ahead, turn it over to Giselle.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with an assessment. So how would you rate your TASFA knowledge level before this session? Are you a beginner? Are you, getting introduced into the process of the TASFA? Are you kind of knowledgeable, but you don't feel like you're an expert? Or are you an expert, everything that there needs to be about the TASFA? And you're able to help your students from A to Z in the process. You can please answer or rate your assessment or assess yourself using the poll.
Yeah, so far it looks like we have about 65% are beginners, 33% are intermediate, and 2% are experts right now.
Awesome. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and just get started with our presentation. So starting with applying for state financial aid, here's some quick reminders when it comes to both the FAFSA and the TASFA. So first of all, the state financial aid priority deadline is January 15th, and this is used as a way to prioritize funding that can often be limited. When it comes to state financial aid, a lot of our programs are limited in funding. So if there's two students who meet the requirements for a state financial aid requirement, but there's only enough funding to award one student, oftentimes schools will use the January 15th, the student who completed their application by January 15th, as an indicator to award that student over the other student. So it's important for students to complete their TASFA as soon as it's open and it's already available for students to complete. And all students interested in applying for financial aid are first encouraged to review the requirements for the FAFSA. And the FAFSA just allows a student to be considered for federal, state, and institutional financial aid opportunities. If a FAFSA eligible student fills out the TASFA, that's going to limit them to being considered for state and institutional financial aid opportunities. So it's important that students review those requirements and determine which application is best for them. And if the student completes a FAFSA, they should not complete the TASFA. Oftentimes, students think that they will get more money if they fill out the TASFA, but that's just going to confuse the school. They're going to question which application is the correct one, and it may delay their financial aid packaging. Students who do not complete the FAFSA may complete a TASFA to be considered for state financial aid programs. And here's some frequently asked questions, but everyone just write your question or the answer to these questions in the chat. If a student cannot fill out the FAFSA, should they fill out the TASFA to get state financial aid? Okay, let me see. Okay, I see a no. I see a lot of no. So that is correct. So No, students eligible to complete the FAFSA should only complete the FAFSA. If a student completes the TASFA when they're FAFSA eligible, it may delay their financial aid processing. It may prompt the school to reach out to the student to clarify their filing status. All right, so should a student submit their paper TASFA to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board if they decide not to fill out the online TASFA? I see a couple of no's. That is correct. So the student should only submit their TASFA to the financial aid office at the college they're planning to attend. The online TASFA, that information is collected by the coordinating board, but we're just a pass-through. Essentially, once a student submits the TASFA, we send that information overnight to the school that they selected in their application. So when it comes to the paper TASFA, students should not send it to us. They should send it directly to the school so the school can process their paper TASFA. Okay, so let's move forward with updates on the online TASFA. So I like going over the differences between the online TASFA and the FAFSA just because although they collect the same information and the way institutions use the information to determine a student's financial need are similar or they're the same, they vary differently when it comes to the bells and whistles that they have. The FAFSA has a lot of bells and whistles. I think it's helpful just to go over these differences. So how the online TASFA differs from the FAFSA is that there's no IRS link or document uploads on the application. So any supporting documentation that the student needs to submit, such as their tax return, that will be determined by their school, and they will have to submit it directly to the school to get their application processed. And there's no autofill from the prior application year. The FAFSA saves the students, name, their date of birth, just information that typically doesn't change, like income information from year to year. The TASFA doesn't have that functionality. And at the end of the FAFSA, the student gets a estimate of what their student aid index is and what federal financial aid they may be eligible for. Unfortunately, the TASFA is just a pass through. We don't provide students a student aid index estimate or a general idea of what they could be eligible for. That's something that they would have to discuss with the school directly after they submit their application. And there's also students are not able to make edits to the application after they submit the TASFA. So it's very important that students review the information they enter, and if they are dependent, that their parents review the information entered on the TASFA to ensure that it's correct, because once a student submits an application, they cannot make edits or they cannot log back in to make edits. Of course, if they make a mistake, because we're all human, they will have to consult directly with the school they're planning to attend so they could make the edits on the school's side. And unfortunately, the TASFA is not available in Spanish online, but we do provide a Spanish copy of the paper TASFA. So, we have heard feedback from some students that they use the paper TASFA while they're completing the English application. So that could be an option, or if they are not comfortable filling out the TASFA in English online, they do have the Spanish paper TASFA that they can submit to their school. Now, this is not to say that we're not going to improve the TASFA at all, but I think it's important to highlight these differences between the applications just because it is easy to kind of get them confused just because they do collect the same information. All right, so let's go over another big difference is who needs to create an account. So unlike the FAFSA, in the FAFSA, there's various contributors that need to create an account. In this case, the only entity that will be creating an account and entering information on the application is the student. Now, parents of dependent students do not have to create an account, but they do need to have an email that's different from the students, because the student will, if the student is dependent, they have to enter their parents' email address, and at the end of the process, they're going to send a secure view-only copy of the TASFA for their parent to review. And in order to access that copy of the TASFA, the parent has to answer 3 security questions, which is basically the student's email address, the student's application ID, and the student's date of birth. Now, when creating a TASFA account, it's important that students and parents avoid using temporary emails like school or work email addresses that rely on employment or being enrolled, and to make sure that their email has enough storage to receive notifications. All right, so let's go on to the fun topics, some updates for the 26-27 for the TASFA. So this is actually a special year for the TASFA. This is the first year that the online TASFA has launched on October 1st. So it is available. We do recommend for students, if they haven't completed their TASFA, for them to get started on it. And we didn't really make any updates to the TASFA. Mainly the updates that we have made was aligning the TASFA with the FAFSA. And let's go over some of those updates right now. So we did make some user experience updates, such as we now display the year at the top of the application, just to help applications confirm they are completing the correct form. So we received updates or feedback last year from institutions and students saying that it's kind of hard to tell once you start the application what application you are actually completing. The only indication previously was when you are in the applications page, it shows you which application you want to start. And once you click on start, basically, there's no other indication what year you're completing the TASFA for. So this would lead to students kind of completing the application for the wrong year. And for students constantly going back because they don't recall which year they were, if they weren't they weren't confident in which application they were completing. So now for 26-27, as the student scrolls through the application, they'll be able to see the application year. We also modified all date of birth fields to prevent selection errors. Now, the issue with this is that we had students who were entering 2025 as their birth year, and that would create an issue with the school because, you know, since TASFA students, they may not have a social security number. The data that the school uses to match their TASFA with their school record is often their name and their date of birth. So because of that, that would create a data mismatch, and it would be harder to find the students or to link their TASFA with their school records. So now we've made this field much more intuitive to where students are not likely to make errors on entering the incorrect date of birth. We also updated question 46. We actually removed that question. This previously asked whether an applicant has earned a graduate degree, just because the FAFSA removed this question. So it's not necessary to have it on the TASFA. And we also combined questions 54, 55, and 56, which previously collected dependency determination information related to homelessness. We combined those, or we replaced them with questions 53 and 54. And this is just to align the TASFA with the FAFSA. Now, these questions, the content, the students answering these questions, they're going to essentially be answering the same questions or providing the same answers. It's just that we want to match our wording and the structure to the FAFSA just to prevent confusion with institutions. Okay, so questions 65 and 62, which collected the highest level of education completed for each parent, has been combined into one question, into question 57, just to align with the FAFSA. So this is how the questions looked previously. And now it's all one question. Now, here's a pop quiz. So provide your answers in the chat. So Counselor Tony wants to know, what specific information will a student need to fill out the TASFA? So do you need a W-2 form? Do you need a selective service registration number? Please write your answer in the chat. Okay, so the answer to this question is here at the coordinating board, we do not determine what supporting documents are required from TASFA applicants. Each school has their own policies and procedures, which is why we always recommend for students to contact the institution that they plan to attend, just to ensure that they are submitting all the required information in order to get their financial aid processed. Moving on. So once a student submits their application, their TASFA, who exactly do they need to talk to? So depending on the question, we may be able to help at the coordinating board. So we can help with technical issues completing the online TASFA, any general questions about the TASFA, if the student has any issues accessing their account, or if they have any questions on our web pages, such as our TASFA webpage or My Texas Future. And if they have more questions on next steps on what to do after submitting the TASFA, it's always recommended they contact the institution. If they have any questions on required documentation or complex questions about completing the TASFA, or where they stand when it comes to their state financial aid eligibility, it's always recommended that they contact the institution. We're just a pass-through. We do not determine eligibility for state financial aid, or we don't process the TASFA at the coordinating board. Now, here are some dependent student scenarios. So what if a dependent student cannot provide parent information on the TASFA? So unfortunately, the online TASFA currently does not allow dependent students to skip providing parent information. So students who cannot provide parent information should contact the financial aid office at the school that they plan to attend. And what if the student has two parents that are married or living together? So both parent information will be needed on the TASFA, but only one parent needs to review the student's TASFA, review the information entered on the TASFA, and acknowledge their review on the application. Now, what if the student has two parents that are divorced, or they're not living together and they're not remarried? So the parent who supported the student the most financially over the 12-month period before the TASFA is submitted will need to report their information on the TASFA. Now, if the parents are divorced or not living together and one or both are remarried, the parent who provided the most support during the 12 months before the student submitted the TASFA must report their information as parent one. And if the parent is remarried, the step parent must report their information as parent two. And what if the student lives with a guardian or relatives and their parents live in another country? So unless the guardian or the relative has legally adopted the student, they should not provide the information on the TASFA. I know we do often have students who their parents do live in another country, and it's easier just to provide a US tax return from their guardian here in the United States. But unfortunately, unless that guardian has legally adopted them, they must provide their parents, they must report their parents' income information on the TASFA. And we do have guidance for students who do fall under that circumstance on the TASFA. On the online TASFA, there is a help icon bubble that they can click on, and it will give them more guidance. And on the paper TASFA, there's more help under the notes section of the paper TASFA. Okay. So here's a true or false question. So similar to the FAFSA, parents, legal guardians will need to create their own TASFA account for login purposes in order for the student to submit the form online. Is that true or false?
All right now I'm seeing 80% have said false, and then you have 22% that have said true.
Okay, well, I'm glad that a majority of the audience has answered that correctly. And that's why I thought it was important to cover the differences between the FAFSA and the TASFA, just because y'all are working with so many students. It's a lot of information to memorize, and both applications collect the same information. So it's really easy to kind of mistake, the capabilities of the FAFSA with the TASFA. Thank you everyone for participating. All right, and with that, let's go ahead and assess your knowledge at the end of this session. Are you a beginner, an intermediate, or expert at the end of the session?
Looks like I'm seeing 76% feel like they're intermediate, 21% feel like they're beginner, 10 or 9% feel like they're an expert. So yeah, seeing a majority of them being intermediate now. So
Awesome. I do see some questions on the Q&A, so let me go ahead and address those. So from Shelby, we did get a question on, with the law changes, who can do the TASFA? If a student has a TPS, can they do the TASFA? If a student has an H-1B, can they do the TASFA? So unfortunately, we cannot answer that question. That is something that is determined by the institution. So first of all, the TASFA and state residency are two different things. Students who are residents and non-residents can fill out the TASFA. When it comes to being eligible for state financial aid, a majority of our state financial aid programs, about 99% of our programs, require that a student is considered a Texas resident. Now, that specific requirement is determined by each individual school. So we do have some rules that are currently proposed and available for public comment. And we do have a Texas residency webpage that kind of highlights what the Texas residency rules are, along with a residency questionnaire. Institutions must use that information to determine each student's residency status, and that will help the school determine if they're eligible for certain state financial aid programs. Okay, I do see another question on residency as well. So the TASFA and residency are two separate things. When it comes to residency, that is a requirement for a lot of state financial aid programs. That is something that is determined by the school. So students will need to consult with the registrar's office at the school that they're planning to attend for more information on state residency. Okay, we also have another questions. Can students from mixed status families submit a TASFA to be considered for state aid if they are not comfortable with completing the FAFSA? So when it comes to that, it's best that it is a decision that they will have to make as a family. Um, and if they have any concerns on privacy, it's best to consult with the school that they're planning to attend. I do see another question. Is the January 15th priority deadline for the TASFA or the FAFSA or both? So often, so this is for both. This is required from universities and health-related institutions, but I have noticed that schools that fall outside of those categories do use the state priority deadline. So it's always recommended that they do complete the FAFSA or the TASFA by January 15th. But if they want to know any specific deadlines, it's important to talk to the school just to make sure that they're meeting the school's deadlines aside from January 15th. Yes, I can post the Texas residency website on the chat. And when it comes to additional questions on residency and what lawfully present means, I can give you an email to Charles Quintero-Poles. He's our assistant commissioner, and he will be happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding residency.
Thank you so much, Giselle. That was awesome. Good explanation of the TASFA. And thanks, guys, for all of your questions. I see those coming in. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Josh, who was going to talk about our bright ideas.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for all your great questions and sticking with us through all the information today about FAFSA and TASFA. This next section that we're about to switch into, Bright Ideas, maybe you're familiar with it. This is going to highlight your answers to the registration questions that we asked you initially. So we do comb through all of these, read every single one. So thank you so much for submitting those. And we'll go ahead and just jump into the first question that we asked to talk about your answers. So we asked you, what are the most common financial aid misconceptions you encounter from students or families, and how do you address them? So overall, we saw a lot of answers regarding misconceptions about whether or not the FAFSA is even worth completing. Similar with TASFA, right? So to kind of break this down a little bit further, a lot of students or families were questioning their eligibility of how much they might receive if their family earns above a certain amount, or maybe some students and families just flat out convinced that they are not going to receive any kind of financial aid at all. Others more concerned or having misconceptions about who to put as the parent or the main contributor. A lot of questions about that. I know we got some good information about it today. But then the third theme that we saw in these answers were just the differences in the types of aid. So some people not understanding the differences between loans, subsidized versus unsubsidized, grants, scholarships, how all of these things are different. But you also did provide a lot of great information about how, through explaining your role to students and families, how you work with students, perhaps your previous experience, if you've been doing this for a while, or maybe been through a few years of supporting students with FAFSA, TASFA scholarships, and just overall building awareness through your campus events and your communication. A big note with the communication is also just making that language very accessible. If things are maybe a new term or it sounds a little complicated, having just some solid explanations that you can continually go back to and support students and families there. Now, our second question that we asked y'all in registration is, let me switch mine here. What challenges have you faced when guiding students through the FAFSA or TASFA, and what solutions have worked? So plenty of answers about the technical bugs, right? Those are just bound to happen. And I know one solution that people talked about with that is just being sure to sign up for newsletters, making sure that you're receiving updates to sometimes know about maintenance issues or bugs in advance so that you can just say, all right, maybe we're going to pause our financial aid efforts for this week, or just knowing the appropriate workarounds, also having the contact information for any FAFSA hotline numbers, help desk numbers, knowing where your communications is coming from with your local IHEs. But then further themes that we saw here is, again, just continuing to build trust with families. This may be kind of a foreign or scary topic here that people are not familiar with. It's maybe your first time engaging with a family that you haven't seen, and then all of a sudden it's senior year and we're talking about their tax information and how much people earn, right? These can be touchy subjects sometimes. So just making sure that you build that trust with some steady and clear communication. We saw some woes talking about previous efforts with creating login information, verification process, being sure to avoid typos there, accurately inputting information, making sure that students are using personal emails that they regularly check, making sure they don't lose their login information, which ultimately led us to the third major theme that we saw with this question, which is just being able to stay organized. So we've done some previous sessions over how you can do that with the Apply Texas Counselor Suite, which is a great tool to check financial aid status there. It won't show you really a difference between whether or not a student has submitted FAFSA versus TASFA, but it will show you if that submission status is either complete, incomplete, or if the student has been selected for verification. So a lot of great feedback on that question. And then our third registration question that we had is, now that the FAFSA simplification process has been implemented for 2 years, what are some changes that you feel have helped your students and families in the application process? So y'all gave a lot of answers just talking about how, although there are going to be some hiccups again around technical issues or maybe some of those one-off situations with determining if a student is provisionally independent or something like that, many of you were thankful for these changes. You reported a lot of success with sometimes students only taking 15 minutes to get through their FAFSA submission. A lot of that, I think, can be attributed to the direct data exchange with that IRS data retrieval tool. Many of you were also just talking about how, compared to 3 years ago, we have simplified and reduced questions to kind of help streamline that process, help students and families be more intuitively guided toward the right category for them. Again, if they're dependent, independent, whose information to report. And then ultimately being able to get a head start by creating those FSA IDs ahead of time. You can go ahead and knock that part out before even looking into actually submitting the FAFSA. So great feedback there. And we're going to continue with a lot of great resources that we want to also let y'all know about. So as I mentioned in the chat, we are going to be following up in our email with a recording of this webinar, a copy of the slides, and then a total resource document that's going to contain all of the great links that we talked about today. But if you're somebody like me who can watch a webinar, get a lot of great information, but maybe you retain it better through reading it, going through some coursework, the Texas On-Course Academy is going to be your best friend. So this is something, again, that is going to be free. You can log in if you've been here before, or you can create an account. And then from your dashboard, you would want to go to, for this topic specifically, advising foundational knowledge, designing college and career planning. Now, from there, we have 5 different modules that you can go through, and you see little screenshots of these here. But this is going to be a ton of great information as far as financial aid and literacy. These are topics that have just been refreshed and renewed as of, I guess it's maybe about 6 weeks or so ago. So this is the latest, greatest content that you could get your hands on. Great for you, great for if you have other staff members at your school that are looking to brush up on this knowledge or maybe get into a certain topic. You can go here. And then as far as these modules, there's going to be topics that you'll see, FAFSA, TASFA, state aid and scholarship. There's going to be some module material over just highly selective scholarships, and then overall just post-secondary education and training financing. So regardless of what you want to look at, this is going to be especially helpful. And it's also just going to link you to not only the templates, resources, and tools that we have featured in the Academy, but it will also link you to some of the other tools and resources that we have in My Texas Future and direct admissions. So don't have time to go through everything that's on here, but as far as just Unit 1, this is one that we really want to highlight. And Unit 1 is going to really have a whole feature on the return on investment that students can get through pursuing post-secondary education and training. So rather than always talking about it as a return on investment, they have this kind of great mantra that they feature called learn more, earn more. So again, kind of breaking down the language, making it more accessible. A lot of great tools there for exploring your funding options, looking at a comprehensive funding plan, learning how students can really make the best choice for them. It's going to be a little bit different for each student and each family. So this module is just going to completely go through all of that. And again, just kind of set them up so that whatever they're looking at long term, they can see how even if they are having to maybe spend a little money out of pocket or perhaps take out a loan, right? There's those different options, but they can also see how that is going to come back to them in their career earnings with some labor market data that we have to look at average salaries and things like that for specific careers. Another unit that we want to highlight is the second one. So this is planning for financial aid and literacy introduction. And what I really like about this one is the literacy timeline that we have. So this, again, is just kind of going through and breaking down some specific topics as far as what students need to know at certain parts of their educational journey. I know if you've helped students with this before, if you've been in the field for a while, it can feel like drinking from a fire hose when it comes to all the information with financial aid and how much it changes from year to year. So this can kind of just break it up into pieces as far as having a good timeline there for that. And again, it's going to kind of pair this with My Texas Future to look at college and career action plans broken up by school year as well too. So tons of great information. And then just kind of 2 more pieces of information that we'll look at here are our FAFSA and TASFA checklists. If you're like, look, I think I got the basics. I just need something short and sweet to give my students, give my families right now. We're going to be sending this. It is a document that has 2 pages for FAFSA, 2 pages for TASFA. So it's just that immediate checklist of what documents they need, what are the exact steps. Could be a great tool for you to use in your campus events, in your support, or to just pass along to students and families as they may be working on this on their own as well too. So really breaks it down in a simple way. Now, lastly, if you're looking for something more robust, Again, we do have these toolkits that are downloadable, and these are fully comprehensive as well, because not only are you going to have materials that are there for counselors and advisors, but there's three other toolkits. One of them is for your any kind of community partner you may be working with. There's going to be a toolkit just for families, and then a toolkit just for students. So this is going to be much more robust as far as just the explanations, the breakdowns, answering FAQs, checklists, resources. It's all there. It's all downloadable. And so that is something else that we'll be including in our follow-up email in the resource doc.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. That was wonderful. And all right, now we get to talk about the My Texas Future Recognition Program. But before we jump into that and those details, we can't do that without spending a little time just to talk about what My Texas Future is. And at its core, My Texas Future allows users to explore interests in regional in-demand careers. There's some fabulous quizzes within My Texas Future's website that can lead students to career clusters and careers of interest. And then when they discover those, they can find out the programs that connect to those specific careers so that they can really start to envision what they're going to do after high school or the path that they want to take. They can also access step-by-step college and career action plans. These are very simple action plans that give students a really great idea of what they need to be working on, what they need to be working towards so that they can get into the school that they really want to. It also allows students to, very importantly, start researching college and careers at an early age. It introduces students to the ideas and concept and just the process of what goes into applying to college, being able to pay for it, and really like narrowing down their options and also learning about different opportunities. So there's so much to explore and do within My Texas Future that we created the My Texas Future Recognition Program. So this program allows your school to gain recognition just by incorporating My Texas Future into student activities and programs, which many of you might already do. And some of you might have already signed up for our recognition program because we have been talking about it for a couple months now. But it's a really exciting thing that we've launched this year, and it is open to middle and high schools all over Texas. And you can participate this academic school year. So why participate? Why sign up? Well, you are going to receive not just recognition by the coordinating board, but also My Texas Future branded items. So we will send you a packet that has all kinds of goodies in there that you can pass out at student events. We're also going to send you customizable digital marketing tools that you can download and print, customize with your school logo, and put up on your campus so that you can tell your district, your principal, whoever it is, that your school is a My Texas Future recognized campus. So how do you become involved in the program? Well, first things first, you complete the very simple interest form, and it is super quick and easy, and we're going to send you the items. We get your interest form, we send you those items, and then you can hand out those My Texas Future swag items at student events. You can print and display the flyers and the banners and the posters all over campus, and you can even include materials at parent events or coffee with the principal. Step two is just start to incorporate My Texas Future into your already planned college and career activities. If you have application workshops going on, maybe you direct students to My Texas Future to research colleges or career opportunities. Maybe you have a financial aid event coming up. You can guide students to My Texas Future because there's some really great information in there on how to pay for college. You can also incorporate My Texas Future into AVID classes or first year intro classes or advisory periods. These are great ways to just get students started with My Texas Future and learn about this awesome website. And then step three is just being recognized by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board as a My Texas Future campus. And we're so excited to celebrate you guys and all of the hard work that you do with incorporating My Texas Future into your campus activities. So that being said, if you still have questions about the program or just want a few more details, you can sign up on October 23rd at 10 a.m. for a Q&A session where we're really going to dive into this program. We're going to show you some of the recognition materials that you can receive, some of those things that you'll get in the mail and in your email. So you can just scan that QR code, or Jared just popped the registration link in the chat that you can access. So I hope to see you there. It's going to be a fun time. Who knows what you'll get? That being said, as everyone here on the call probably knows, we have a professional learning session every month. So this month, of course, we covered TASFA and FAFSA financial aid, and our next session will be on November 18th at 10 a.m. So mark your calendars. And we're going to be talking about fresh tools, insider look into the updated Texas On-Course Academy. So we're really going to look into the upgrades and updates that we made to the Texas On-Course Academy. Like Josh mentioned, he showed some things when he went over the spotlight. And our guest is the coordinating board's very own Samantha Gonzalez, our Assistant Director of Content and Resources. She oversees the Academy. She's phenomenal, and we're excited to have her on November 18th. And then, of course, we have our tiny takes. If you are looking for a bite-sized 30-minute session where we cover a lot of information in a very short amount of time, then we would love for you to attend our tiny takes. Like I said, these are only 30 minutes. Our next one coming up is going to be on November 13th, all about the Texas First program. Then on February 19th, we're going to talk about Your Future, Your Way, tools for adult learners. And then on April 23rd, we're going to have a session on guiding student success, integrating the Texas On-Course College and Career Readiness curriculum into your planning. So you do not want to miss these quick 30-minute sessions where you get a lot of information. And I'll go ahead and pass it to Jared to talk about the network newsletter.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending today's session. We had a great amount of information today on the FAFSA and TASFA, but I definitely want to talk about the Texas On-Course monthly network newsletter, your monthly toolkit for college and career success. This is our lovely newsletter that I write every month. And so it's typically released on the first Wednesday of every month. This past month in October, we actually provided resources or additional resources from the updated Texas On-Course Academy. And I'm actually going to drop a link in the chat right now to view like the web version. In the web version, you can view the resources that were provided, of course, as well as additional registration for like professional learning series sessions. And then you can also subscribe to the newsletter as well within that web edition. But definitely encourage you all to subscribe to the newsletter to receive all updates regarding Texas On-Course and receive valuable resources to help you with your students and families.
Awesome. Thank you, Jared. All right, as promised, here is our resource doc. This is a phenomenal, quick document that has links to everything that Giselle talked about, everything that Jasmine talked about. You can have immediate access to all of our slide decks so that you can kind of review this as you need to. So if you scan that QR code, you can access it, and then it is also we're also going to put that link in the chat in just a minute, so you can access it there. But really great information on that. You can also find our contact information. And with that, we're going to dive into our Q&A. I'm going to go ahead. I just saw these come through the Q&A just about the recognition program. These are both great questions, and then we'll address some of the other ones. But Kathy asked, the recognition program is only for high schools and middle schools, not CBOs. Kathy, that's a great question. If you are a college-based organization helping out a campus, we actually would like you to fill out the form and get the information, because you could help that campus become recognized. Talk to the administrators on campus or the teachers, counselors that you work with, and have them become involved as well. So great questions, great question, Kathy, but we do would love to encourage our college-based organizations to also participate. And then I also saw a question from Anna. How do I become involved? Great question. There's a very simple interest form that we can drop the link in the chat for you so that you can quickly fill that out. And after you fill that interest form, guys, it's that easy. We're going to send you the materials. You fill out the interest form, we send you the materials, and then you can go ahead and start incorporating My Texas Future into your college and career activities and advertise that you're a recognized campus. So great question, Anna. Before I get into the few others that we have, because we have been answering them as we go, if you have a second, we would love for you to just fill out the survey that we have. It's super short, super simple. We always appreciate your feedback. So if you could fill that out, that'd be great. All right, I see another one in the chat, and this is for Giselle. Is it still worth it to file TASFA? Seems like a lot of confusion if students are still even eligible.
Yeah, so right now I still encourage students to submit the TASFA just because the TASFA and state residency are two different things. Anyone can submit the TASFA. The TASFA is just something that calculates financial need. If a student submits a TASFA, the school will evaluate their eligibility for state financial aid. Now, a lot of state financial aid does require that a student is a Texas resident, and that definition has been changed as of late. So, but it doesn't hurt to find out whether you're eligible or not. So I encourage everyone to still submit the TASFA.
Awesome. Thank you, Giselle. I just put the resource link in the chat, and here's for the interest form. I don't see any more questions coming. Let me just check the chat really quickly. Just a quick reminder, we will be sharing all of this information in our follow-up email in just a couple days, so be looking for that. We'll include the email addresses that we discussed today if you do have further questions regarding the TASFA. All of the links that Jasmine referred to in her slide deck, we will also make sure to include those. Let's see. Application available. As I mentioned, all of our contact information is on the resource doc, including Giselle's, so you can reach out to us if you need to. Jasmine's is on there as well. I have a question from Kathy. Is there a guide you are all putting together about what institutions are requiring? I believe this is in reference to if institutions are what they're requiring for our undocumented students. Do you have a list of what that might be?
So on the Texas residency webpage, we do have the residency questionnaire that's been updated with all the changes, with the change to Texas residency. That's the only resource that we provide. Each school uses that information to determine what documentation is needed at their school to determine residency. So when it comes to the information that the student actually needs to, what type of bills or, what type of documentation to establish or to prove lawful presence, that's something that the student will have to reach out to the school. The most that we provide is the questionnaire on our Texas residency webpage.
Awesome, thank you. I hope that helped Kathy. And then I don't see any others. I think we covered them all. We did also answer a lot during the presentation, so you can check there for responses, but I believe we got them all. I want to quickly again thank everyone for being here today, this morning, learning about the FAFSA and TASFA with us. And most importantly, thank you to our phenomenal guest speakers for taking the time and supporting us in our efforts, getting the word out there, and discussing these topics. We cannot tell you how much we appreciate your support, time, and efforts that go into creating these webinars. So thank you all so much today. We appreciate your support, and please reach out if you have any other questions.